wise as the serpent and innocent as doves. Welcome to Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, aliens, monsters, and we are back again, Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
You left out demons.
Oh, damn.
And angels.
Sorry, demons.
Scriptards, welcome as well.
That's right. I need to add to my list. Scriptards, demons, angels, and snakes. Oh, by the way, I meant to ask you this. What snake do we have out here that's almost khaki colored, like really light khaki, and then has like a bronze mark? It was moving too fast for me to see what the markings were, but it was huge. I was up there on the second tier where I was mowing the grass up there with the tractor. And I mean, it
could have been a schneem.
Oh,
hognose?
Schneem? Oh, okay.
It could have been a hognose.
Yeah, because I just haven't seen one that was.
They're real light brown.
Yeah, I mean, he was like, it looked like khaki, like he was. Close to white. It was really cool looking.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Anyway, I have a semi-correction to make. I was talking about the visions at Fatima, I think on episode 666. And I've talked to a few people about it since then, including my mother, who corrected me on the number of people that were there. And so then I went to look it up, how many people saw this third vision, and she says there were 6, which I couldn't find out if that was clear or not. But yeah, she says there were 6 people there, or 6 visions, and there were 70,000 people. And when I went to look it up, I saw reports of anywhere from 5,000 to 70,000 people. So
it was probably 72,000.
That's right. 7,200 or 72,000 people. That's probably what it was. So there was that correction. And I'm dumb for not looking that up before I didn't know I was going to talk about it, but I was going to. Yeah, all this is from memory, folks.
From
Just
here
keep that
on
in
out,
mind.
we're always dumb for never looking it up before we talk about it because we never know what we're going to talk about
That's
when
right.
we get in here.
That's right.
Except for sometimes.
Except for pyramids, because we always talk about pyramids.
Right, and we're always looking them up, so it's okay.
Yeah. And I've gotten a couple of questions from listeners.
Right.
Yeah. They still are stubbornly not posting the questions to the blog, but that's fine. I get them posted to my text message inbox. But they're good questions, so we'll address those at some point. But right now, I'm more interested in hearing about this new book you're reading.
Well, it's a PDF, and I'm not actually reading it. I'm listening to my.
I should have looked that up before I talked about it.
Yeah. It's my phone's like default computer voice.
Right.
I just make it. But I'm telling you, dude, like I've done this so much. I haven't done it in a while, and I just got this book. I finished Magicians of the Gods for like the 3rd time.
Yeah, I'm starting to go through it again this time.
So I was like, I went on Graham Hancock's website and I looked up his book references, and I picked this book. It was from, what is it?
Was it his references or was it his suggested book list or something?
Yeah. His booklet.
Okay, yeah.
It was like, suggested reading or recommended reading. Or
right.
whatever, not references. He may have referenced it. I'm pretty sure he
probably does reference it. Yeah.
Because that was really what I was originally thinking was about Hamlet's Mill, which he references a lot.
I've got to read that.
And I got that one too on PDF. And then what was I don't know. Anyway, I'm gonna try to find the name of this real quick. This book that I'm reading, From Atlantis to the Sphinx by Colin Wilson.
Colin Wilson, yeah.
And so I started having my phone read it to me, and I was just surprised because when I would pause it at work to do, some other stuff, like before I went back to listening to it, I was imagining it in the guy's voice. Like my brain is like making up this dude's whole persona that as I'm listening to it. That's how used to this computer voice that I've gotten. Where
So like the guy that got the camera that sees color for him, your brain is like changing the
it's-
input into something else. That's
because
really cool.
that voice is so monotonous, it's like I don't even perceive the voice as a
Right.
character.
That's awesome.
Anymore. I just get the info.
Right.
And I was like, I was confirming that again today, like listening to this book. And whenever I would pause it, like later when I'm thinking about the story, I was like, when I was thinking about the things that he was saying,
You're hearing it in
I'm
his
hearing
voice.
it in like a male voice that I'm
Wow.
sort of, my brain's like making up. I was like, what? This is weird.
That's really awesome.
But it's really great. So, if you can't find your books on audio, the books that you want to listen to on audio, try your default phone computer voice.
Right.
Do it until you're no longer annoyed.
Right. so trying to find like a really badass computer voice is not a good idea. If you get the default monotonous one, eventually,
Yeah.
because there isn't
And
a personality.
Honestly, I went through that. I went through like downloading all of the most top of the line updated, voices or whatever. And they have so many problems that this generic one does not.
Okay.
And I don't know why that is, but this generic one has less distracting things about it than
okay.
than these really quote unquote awesome ones. So
Okay.
I've tried a bunch of them.
Also,
and I tried
like-
different accents and all this stuff, and finally I just went back to the generic.
Also, like these voices are meant to say the 500 most used words. I mean,
Yeah.
so like when they're talking about
the Anunnaki. Yeah.
yeah, when you're reading books that are about what we're talking about, it's going to be a lot of words.
It's really weird, but having listened to Magicians of the Gods and Fingerprints of the Gods like 3 times over, both of them.
Which is what Graham Hancock is reading it himself.
Right. I'm getting, so I
And
know,
he sounds like he could
I
teach
know a lot of the
diction at
names.
Oxford.
I know a lot of the, proper names of all of these places from him. And so when I hear the computer voice say it wrong, I'm like, that's this place or whatever. That's that guy.
And that reminds me, there's another correction we need to make. The pronunciation of Noah's name in the Assyrian. What did you say? Because I call him Xisithris, and you said it was
I think he says
Zisuthris or something like that.
yeah, something like that. Zisuthris. But there was two names. One of them is
Upnaptshim.
yeah. Well, okay. Now there's
I don't
3
even know
names.
how to say that one.
Because Zisuthris or whatever was another name was something else very similar to Zisuthris, but I don't know.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make
Put me on the spot here. I don't know.
Oh, okay, well, my point was like he was saying, Kyle was telling me that he could, whenever I would say the name Xisithris or whatever, he was like, who is he talking about?
Yeah.
And that's because I'm not saying it the way that most people say it, I guess.
Yeah, so Graham Hancock says something like Zisuthris.
Yeah, Zisuthris.
But again, Graham Hancock says Puma. For a puma.
Right, Puma.
And he says aluminium. So I don't know. No offense, Graham. I'm just
That's
joking.
the right pronunciation for those ook people at the UK.
Yeah. So in this new book, this guy, well, this is not a new book, I don't think, but this guy was inspired by Graham Hancock's research. He was inspired by Robert Schoch's research, and he goes through all these dudes, that have looked at the pyramids and the Sphinx and Christopher Dunn, the engineer.
Yeah.
He's talking about all these characters that we know.
Christopher Dunn.
Well, that looks like a human face. This is a very complex geometry. This curve is going from the chin up to the cheekbone, but it's also curving forward if you look at the face from the side. That's a very complex geometrical principle.
That's great. That's great.
That's not just a guy with a stone saying that looks like a human face.
That's really good.
I love Christopher Dunn.
Yeah, he's awesome. I watched all the video. Him and David Hatcher Childress made a lot of. I mean, basically you can find them on online. They're YouTube videos that were not made into any kind of movie or documentary or whatever. Just them walking the ancient shit and and he's just looking at stuff and comparing things and David doesn't know any engineering or whatever. So he's like, so it's like this giant block, right? And Christopher Dunn is like, oh, dude, these are very precise.
Yeah.
It's great.
I see these are modern tools for measuring very precise.
How do you have to have modern tools to measure these ancient blocks?
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Christopher Dunn also has a book called the Giza Power Plant,
Right.
which was in Graham's recommended reading.
Right. It's because as an engineer, a mechanical engineer, and then he runs basically a machine shop. Like he runs a machine shop where they make precision parts for very complicated machines and stuff. And so when he saw the precision of the stonework in some of these ancient sites, especially the Giza pyramid, he said this kind of precision is you only see it with machines. We don't have to have this kind of So he comes up with a theory that it's a power plant, which is may not be, but it's a brilliant idea. So
I was thinking in this book, From Atlantis to the Sphinx, he goes over the drill cores, right?
Yeah, the drill cores that Petrie found.
Right, they're drilling through this granite, and they're at first they're looking at like the depth of each rotation, like how far it goes down, and it's
ridiculous. Yeah,
it's like 20 times more than the most modern.
Right.
Drills.
If you look at something that we drilled with any kind of modern tool, like if you look at the shaft that's been drilled, or if it's a core, but basically most people are familiar with drilling a hole. So if you look at the walls of the hole when we've drilled it, you could see like tons of little tiny lines because they're right next to each other as the drill eats down to the material.
Making many rotations as it's moving downward.
And all
slowly.
the lines are very thin and very, very close to each other because our drills do something like 500 revolutions will take it down like a tiny bit, right?
Yeah, I don't remember what it's like 10,000ths of an inch or something like that. I can't remember the exact numbers. It's really, really small.
Right, but the cores or the cores or the shafts that were drilled in Egypt and in other places like in Tiwanaku in Peru, the penetration is just
Actually,
incredible.
I think it was something more, and I could be wrong about this, but I think it was something more like 20,000 times further for one rotation.
Right, it was a massive amount because our drills basically spin really fast, and it looks like theirs were just going slow, but just chewing through it, right?
Right. So they were talking about the force of how many tons would have to be pushing down on this thing.
Right.
But then there was this other study that he goes over in this book, and I'm not going to get all the details just right, so don't freaking script herp me here. But it was something about there were two different types of stone in the granite. There was quartz layers, and then there was another
like agate or something. No, the agate is the crystal.
Man, I just had the name of this other stone.
Sorry,
but anyway, it's not your fault. I just can't remember it. There was a different type of stone, and this other one, it shows that when the drill was going through this other type of stone, it went slower than when it was going through quartz. Okay, and the quartz crystal is way harder on the scale than this other stone,
which implies some
So these scientists or whatever are doing research on this, and they're like, well, with modern tools, we'll use ultrasonic vibration.
Yeah.
Okay, and because quartz crystal resonates to ultrasound, like we use quartz in ultrasound equipment.
Yeah,
and so because it resonates to ultrasound, it's like the singing to the wine glass and shattering the wine glass.
Right.
It's if it resonates in that frequency range, it's more right. So they're saying the only way we can imagine that this thing is pushing through quartz faster than this other softer thing is that they're using ultrasonic resonance as a hammer on the thing. So it's a ridiculously high frequency hammer that's pounding down on this drill. And so it's like crushing through quartz because it's the ultrasound is shattering it, but this other stuff that doesn't resonate at ultrasound frequencies is breaking up less.
What were we doing? We were driving copper rods into the ground, and I was like, "When are we going to have the tool that just goes whee and it just sinks down into there?"
So that made me think. I was thinking of like neutronium or whatever, just like from a neutron star.
Oh yeah.
Like you had a little BB of it and you dropped it. It would just it would go through the ground like a
it would go to the center
needle,
of the earth. Yeah.
Just like
yeah, it would penetrate to the center of the planet.
Like 1 ton BB.
That's right. Well, it would be 1 cubic centimeter of neutronium is hundreds of millions of tons.
Oh my God.
So it would first you would turn into a little glowing layer on the outside of it. If you were holding it.
If mass is the source of gravity.
Right. Well, if you were holding it, you're basically experiencing its surface gravity, which is hundreds of millions of times. So you would turn into a little tiny glowing. It would make the BB glow, and then it would fall to the center of the earth. You would turn into what's known as degenerate matter. You degenerate. That's really cool. Like, another thing that Chris Dunn has done with Egypt, this was awesome. And this has to do with the cuts that are seen in some of the okay, because we always think of Giza and Egypt, and you've got these pyramids, and then there's desert, and that's not really the case. I mean, there are stones and blocks and cut things and half finished or destroyed. I mean, there's just stonework everywhere, lying all over the place, destroyed. Parts of temples, things that have been destroyed, and like there's one of the videos where they're walking through the area and they're just looking at random worked stone, like laying out in the desert, and Childress is basically showing him they're specifically looking at the Giza Plateau, how it's been leveled.
Yeah,
and we talked about this once before. Like there's basically an uplift, a plateau.
They use like basalt or whatever.
Yeah, they cut off, for whatever reason, they cut the limestone flat. And then there are places where the limestone was actually lower than that, so they filled that with basalt, which is granite. It's a volcanic granite. I mean, it's hard as hell. But it's like it's suffered some breakages and other things or whatever. So there are places where you can kind of see the sides of the basalt blocks that are on the granite or whatever, or on the limestone, and you can see that there were cuts made into it. And I mean, like. They look like the kind of cut you would get, like if you were putting something you were cutting on top of this stone, and then you were using a power tool and cutting down, and your power tool bit a little bit deep and cut into the stone below. That's what it looks like, because it's not all the way through, right? So it's got, but it looks like. Okay, the question basically becomes, if they were doing this with something ridiculous like ropes and sand and water, where two guys are going,
how do you cut too far?
How do you cut too far? Right. And by accident. Whoops. We just took like 24 days and cut too far into this rock. That doesn't really work. So it looks like, I mean, it's almost inarguable.
Well, then you combine that with the drill cores that we're talking about.
Right.
They weren't taking 24, unless it took 24 days for them to make one rotation.
Right.
But still, like,
there was a million guys trying to rotate that drill.
They were cutting very quickly.
Right. So so there are these deep pits in and around these areas on Giza. Like, so it's a long, narrow, and they've called them tombs of various things, but they're not. But they're basically open pits. So it's like long and narrow, and there's these weird half circle indentations at the upper lip of these deep pits or whatever. And Christopher Dunn has speculated, and I think this is brilliant. He's speculated that those half-circle indentations are where an axle sat of a gigantic wheel.
Right.
That, where the lower half of it goes down into the pit, and they spun that thing really quickly, and they could just
push the stones into it. Yeah.
Just cut them in half. Like, that's how you actually, right? And that's genius. And of course, then the question becomes, what was
the discs?
Right, or what was the cutting edge? Because It doesn't matter how big of a wheel or whatever. A wooden wheel with some sand on it is not you're gonna need diamond edges to do what they were doing. So, or something, I guess
jeweled edges.
Yeah. So that's really cool. Yeah, Christopher Dunn is great.
So on this book, another thing that the guy was talking about was the way back when some of the early documentations of people going and checking out the pyramids and stuff, and the casing stones that were still on it before the big earthquake that took them down.
Yeah.
And somebody said that they were covered in
writing,
hieroglyphs and writing all over it. Well, it didn't say hieroglyphs; it said writing.
Yeah.
And somebody said something about there was so much on it would fill a library.
Right. And some of the symbols were also
books or whatever.
Just like when you look at Egyptian stuff now, some of the symbols were huge. And then there was just like billions of tiny ones, right?
Yeah.
So you got like giant figure, and no one.
God, I would.
I know,
love to have seen that.
But here's the thing. Okay, so this is my idea on that, because I've thought about this a lot. There is evidence of a massive workforce at Giza right around, well, close to the time where mainstream science says they were built. Okay. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the things they always point to as evidence that it was built then, because here's all this evidence of this massive workforce. And by the way, and they say this now too, that the massive workforce was not slaves. They were very well appointed. In other words, everybody had their own little huts that, they had, and they were very nice, and they were well fed. There's all this evidence that they were well fed, well taken care of. Okay. And that they were like skilled workers. They weren't slaves. They weren't being forced or whatever. They were doing this because they were proud to, or something, that, this was badass to them. I think that workforce was a repair crew. Okay.
And they may have cased it.
They cased it.
They cased it.
Because look at all the other stuff on the Giza Plateau that's cased.
Right. By
All
people
those
who came
ancient
and did
temples that are
repairs
right
afterwards.
They're cased in things because they were like,
And then they wrote all over whatever
they wrote all over it. That's right. The pyramid itself still is unmarked by the original builders, except by the geometry.
That's the other thing that I've always wondered about, is what I've seen or read was that the 8-sided pyramid, right? It's the Great Pyramid is 8-sided,
right?
Not 4-sided. It's got these,
because it broke its back twice.
yeah. So like at the middle, the cross section of each face, or of each, I don't know how to say this. I'm trying to describe it right. In the middle of each face of the pyramid vertically is like the apex of an angle that's going inward.
Basically, if you think of looking straight down at the pyramid, you have a square with an X through it. Draw a cross in that.
Right. Yeah, there you go.
The lines of the cross are these other hidden
that are like indentations. The cross lines are further in, right? Than
barely,
right.
I mean, you can only see it at the equinox or whatever.
Right, that was the thing. So like this guy had taken a picture at the spring equinox or whatever.
He was a pilot, yeah,
and from up in his plane or whatever. And one side of this, the
nominally flat face,
is a perfect shadow, and the other side's lit up.
Yeah,
and so it's like a marker, but they say that the casing stones
hid
that because the casing stones got thicker as they went towards the center of each face. Yeah. So I'm like, why would you do that? and then correct it if it was so well done? Like, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, that's true. That is
except that there are weird things. There are weird other things that are hidden on purpose, like
the Queen's Chamber shafts.
Yeah, and also that they put the huge granite plugs in the.
Yeah. See, now
to go up into the ascending passage.
Once you get into the interior, like what is that tunnel that's been cut through the stone?
Yeah, so it
looks like somebody was trying to escape, but you're like, where were you escaping to, man?
In this book, they talk about this one guy who came up with a pretty legit, one of the first like theories as to what it was, and that he was looking more at the interior structure.
Was it Petrie?
I don't remember his name, but how he was talking about how this interior structure, say as the pyramid was being built up, would have been an awesome observatory, because you've got this thing at the top, you got the grand gallery where you could build a scaffold to. And then looking through, I guess, the big, massive stones that are on top in multiple layers above the king's chamber.
Right.
You can single out areas of the sky and notice the motions of the stars. And then he was talking about how that well that they said used to have water in it. Yeah. Right. And he was saying how, like a modern day telescope, the light could come through and reflect off the water.
Wow.
And I was just like, I'm trying to envision this. But anyway, it was really cool. So this book has. And this is not this guy's theory.
Man, and then if you're using, I'm sorry, but if you had that, the water would be totally still. But if you had sonic technology, you could make it concave.
That's right.
Oh my God.
That's right. So this is the other thing that I didn't know. Well, I think I'd heard it something like this before. But when that guy, what's his name? The first guy to find
Al-Mahmoud, the
Mahmoud
Caliph, yeah.
When he first got into the descending passage, it was covered in like a ½ inch of salt.
Yes.
The whole, like all of it.
Right.
Was coated in a ½ inch.
And they noticed that, like, at least I know specifically with the Red Pyramid, that salt still leaches out of the walls. And if you go into the lowest chambers in that one, it smells like ammonia, like very strongly of ammonia. You're right. The walls were covered in salt, crystals.
Right.
That had been growing out of the freaking limestone, which implies
maybe it was under the ocean at some point.
Seawater, yeah.
The other thing is that reminded me of was one of the things in the Giza power plant, which is the book and the idea that Christopher Dunn came up with. He was analyzing all of these strange chemicals that had been found, like chemical residues on various different parts of the pyramid in the interior.
Yeah.
And there's just all these weird different chemicals in different spots that are like, why is there all this stuff around that
shouldn't be there? Yeah.
But he started putting together these chemical analyses to determine what type of power plant the thing could be if it was a power plant.
Right.
That it was like a chemical power plant.
Right.
Like
you can think of it as a
battery.
giant battery. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Earth power battery.
And if you fired a microwave at it from space, the guy's freaking awesome.
So he was talking about the shafts being like virtual dipsticks, basically, because the shafts would let you know. Because he was saying, so if you had this liquid in here and this liquid or whatever, then this stuff would float on top of that other stuff, and it'd be in this shaft. And then there, because there was the copper, what people thought were door handles on the door that Gantenbrink saw with his robot. He was suggesting that those were actually electrodes.
Right.
And that you would thus know you would be alerted somehow if the liquid level dropped below the electrodes, so you come back and you can fill it up, put some oil in that thing.
Yeah. You fill it up through the other shaft that actually comes all the way out.
Right. Yeah. The ones on the upper chamber, yeah. The King's Chamber shafts.
But then in the book, this is the first time I've heard this, but the notches in the Grand Gallery, okay, there's these notches in the floor that go up. And they're like useful for stair steps.
But they're not.
Yeah. So he was saying that they alternate, like one notch is perfectly level.
Yeah.
And elongated, right?
Uh-huh.
The notch on the other side is slanted slightly, and then shorter. But so if you think of it as a triangle, that angle in the notch would be like the hypotenuse of a triangle is the same length as the elongated notch on the other side.
Wow.
So it's like then they alternate to the other way, moving up to the next set of notches.
It's shorter, but it's just been it's the same length, but it's been tilted.
It's shorter if you measure straight across.
Right.
Because the walls of the notches are vertical.
Right.
But the floor of the notch on one side is angled downward.
So that implies something.
And on the other side, it's flat.
I don't know what it implies.
But it's the same. And it's like, they were like, in the book, he's like, it's like some mad mathematician was just playing games with this building. It's like, let me just make all this weird, crazy shit that correlates.
Yeah. What Dad and I have always talked about with that is and you probably have seen some of this too, because we grew up in Georgia, so we were near to Fort Benning. Mm-hmm. And they were abandoned military stuff, not deep bases or whatever, but there would be concrete pads that were no longer being used by anything, but they would have weird indentations in them from where gigantic machinery had been attached.
Yeah.
Right. And like when you looked at it, you're just like, what? Because on one side there's this huge oval that goes down a foot. And then it's got a flat bottom, and then like close to that, there's all these other shapes and things, and it was some generator or something was just bolted to the floor there or whatever. But after all that stuff was taken out, and all you have left is this concrete, basically an analog of stone pad, it just looks very weird. Which this is what Christopher Dunn is suggesting too, that all the important bits of the power plant, like they just left the concrete,
right?
They pulled out all the machinery. Somebody did,
right?
Yeah.
So this is it's making me think of sort of a principle here in the way we look at this. If you accept as fact the pyramids as tombs theory, then there's no further thinking being done about what it is. Right? You're done. It's all about like, well, then why is there not a sarcophagus? Well, I don't know. Whatever.
Right.
You're just stuck with these mysteries that are unanswerable. But if you remove that, or you put it back in its place, which is the theory. Right. Then you also
the very first thing that happens is you falsify the theory.
But then you also remove the if you don't take as fact the idea of linear progression of technology with humans, you get rid of all of these houses of cards and all these assumptions,
stacks of assumptions. Yeah.
It just throws open the gates to what could this thing be? And I think that if more people in the world were open to the idea that this could be anything, and it's still a mystery to figure out.
It
would be figured out.
right. Most people think that it's already figured out that
Right.
it's a tomb. Yeah,
And so they don't think about it.
when
They
when Ancient Aliens came out, this kind of got popularized. The I don't know, therefore aliens, right?
Yeah.
And you mostly see like just archaeologists or archaeology students. Or what I saw a lot of archaeology students online because that's how I was interacting with people like that, and they would say this with derision. I don't know, therefore aliens. And like to me, I would just say back to them, well, you're just basically saying I don't know, therefore tombs, or I don't know, therefore temple. Like if you
Right.
either one of those, and you can just forget about it. If it's a temple, a religious object, well, of course people do weird stuff in temples. And it was all ritual significance, and we don't have to figure it out because it was a
Right.
temple. Yeah, so they're actually the
Show me the potsherds. Show me the potsherds.
yeah. They used plastic cups. There are no potsherds. They held their drinks in floating vibrations. I want to get back on this. So we got to take a quick break here. We've already gone 30 minutes. Can you believe that?
Yeah, I can.
All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back to talk about more pyramids, probably ones with snakes in them. Serpents.
Welcome back to Brothers of the Serpent. From a tangent cube of science, we hail on the top of an ancient seabed of eroded rock and shells and
Many dusty bones.
dusty bones of ancient things long past. We're talking about pyramids, of course,
Of course.
and where we always go overtime and are always underpaid.
Working on pyramids is great.
Yeah. So I wanted to bring up this other thing that's in this book, this subject about Enoch. And
Now, there's two Enochs. So which one? I always get confused by this. There was the Enoch that was the son of Cain. And then there's the Enoch that was the grandson of Adam that was on that. It was on the other side. Of
the one
family.
I'm thinking of is
Methuselah's.
before the flood, right?
Right. They're both before the flood.
Oh, okay. I don't know about this other one.
Okay. Yeah. There's
The one who wrote books.
Right. Okay. So I think that's the Enoch of that's Methuselah's grandfather or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry.
So it was just so Enoch. The way I know Enoch is he's a biblical character.
A mysterious one up until very recently.
Right.
Yeah.
And so in this book, from Atlantis to the Sphinx, he was just touching on how the books of Enoch or the book of Enoch was referred to multiple times in all these ancient texts.
Right.
Okay, but it had been lost.
Yeah.
And some of the references were talking about how he built the pyramids
Right.
of Egypt, built
was-
the Great Pyramid of Giza.
He was
right?
Imhotep,
Yeah.
he who comes in peace.
And so this book had been lost for a long time, and some guy, I don't remember his name, went to Ethiopia and found
Right.
the Book of Enoch there and brought it back and, published it or whatever, published
Yeah.
a translation of it.
Fun fact: the Western English, whatever King James version of the Bible, the canon book has 66 books in it.
Right.
The Ethiopian book, the Bible, has 88.
Huh.
So they
That's
have all the apocrypha, what are known as the apocryphal biblical books. All of them are in their Bible. They don't have
okay.
any. Yeah,
Non-canonical bastards.
that's right.
Anyway, so I've talked about this website that I use. It's called Sacred Texts,
Yeah,
sacredtext.com or whatever.
sacred-texts.
Yeah. And it's just a bunch of links to all of these ancient texts, pretty much everything. And when looking or reading the Book of Enoch, there's like 3 or 4 different ones.
Yeah.
And there's one that says like Ethiopic, blah, 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 whatever. And I'm just like, what's that about? Like, no, I'm going to read these other ones. Like, what does Ethiopia know about Enoch? So big mistake. I got to go back and read that. But the idea that, so in the story that Enoch tells, he talks about how he was taken into the heavens, of course, and told to record the knowledge of man.
Yeah.
On a stone, like it supposedly a very bright white stone or something like that.
Yeah, or there's also the legends of the emerald tablets, right?
I don't know about that, but I thought one was like do one on a stone and then another on metal.
That's okay. That's different. Yeah,
The 2 pillars or whatever. One was stone, one was metal, so that if there was a fire, then
Yeah.
you know the whatever.
Yeah,
And if there was water,
right.
you know, if the water happens, then the stone will survive, and if fire happens, then the metal will survive.
Right.
or
That's the
whatever.
pillars of Enoch. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, you know, pyramid, pillar, pyramid, pillar. We're talking about
Pyramid.
etymology. Let's see, where do we get pyramid?
right. That's like tablet. And table.
Yeah. A graph.
Yeah. It's a graph, obviously. It's like the table of logarithms. No. The tablets that I'm talking about, the emerald tablets, are another legend, like the pillars of Enoch.
Yeah.
But they're sometimes attributed to Thoth, Tehodi, the ibis guy.
God of wisdom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that he might be Enoch, but I'm not sure. I really can't tell.
And the 7 sages or whatever.
Yeah. There's
right?
yes. Yeah.
And in well, I don't want to go into that.
Right.
Really, I was bringing up this thing about Enoch because I've been looking at different translations from maybe different copies of the book,
Right.
and not the Ethiopian one
Right.
that this guy discovered, which was the first to bring it back, you know, since it had been lost.
Yeah. Now to be fair, the other translations are translations from Dead Sea Scrolls and stuff. So they're not. It's not like they're inauthentic, and there probably are other translations of the Ethiopian version. I'm just saying that, like, the Ethiopian one or whatever. They're real serious about their biblical books.
So
well,
yeah,
there's
there
a group
were
of them that are.
and there was this other thing about how there were legends or things recorded about how was it Solomon that went to before he died, when he left the kingdom, he went to Ethiopia or something. Or,
yeah. Solomon goes
and you know, people are like, no,
he walks the earth. Remember?
he walked to earth.
Yeah. Oh, he's looking for the Shamir. He did that long journey.
Yeah. So.
And then there's the legend, of course, of the queen of Africa that comes to meet him.
To meet Solomon.
Yeah. And they have a child together. Then of course she has to go back to rule Africa, but she tells Solomon that he will meet his child. And eventually, and it's a boy, and he does eventually go to Jerusalem to meet his father, who's famous apparently. Like the reason the queen went to see him is because she was like, I gotta meet this dude. Like, you know, like she's all the way down there. She's hearing about this king of Jerusalem that's like incredibly wise and has all this wealth and, you know, shining kingdom, and he's got God in his freaking temple, or the Ark of God, and he's actually the reason it's prosperous is because they have the covenant, like a I don't know, a contract, some kind of agreement.
They made a deal.
Yeah, they make great deals. God makes great deals.
I make great deals with God.
My name's Solomon. I love deals. I said I build this building, I get this ring. It's great.
Yeah, I'm gonna make Jerusalem great again.
Yeah. So and this boy, who's not a boy by the time he goes to Jerusalem, apparently at some point moves the Ark of the Covenant. This is how you have there's a group of people in Ethiopia that are actually Jews. They're Jewish. They're very dark, very, very dark skinned, like Ethiopians are, but they have these, and I mean Old Testament Jewish beliefs, like that, like they haven't modernized, like, you know, like modern Jews, like they've kind of, they're not doing the old school rules anymore. They've you know, they've moved forward, not all the way to the New Testament like Christians, but they've moved forward or whatever. They've changed a lot of their beliefs and their ways of life in Ethiopia, there's a version of them, more like, I guess you would call them more like Hebrews. I mean, we're talking about, they have a very ancient set of beliefs that haven't changed at all from the.
They worship the old gods.
That's right, the old gods. And that was what was cool about The Sign and the Seal, is Graham Hancock's book. The first one that he wrote after. It was what got him into this kind of stuff. Anyway, I don't mean to derail what you were talking about.
Well, no, I want to know this story.
Okay, so the Ark.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I wish I could remember his name. It was like Menelik or something like that. The Solomon's son. I
That
think
sounds pretty right.
I think it was Menelik.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. So he goes
Pretty right. It's right enough for Snake Bros.
That's right. So he goes to meet his father, who at this point is old and is getting ready to. And we've already talked about this. Solomon's already kind of getting ready to leave. But
Hang on 1 second.
yeah.
All right.
Menelik, at some point, and I don't know when this happens, but he determines that Jerusalem's going to fall. There's a horde basically coming. It's the first fall. I can't remember if this is the Persians, but somebody basically raids the place and destroy. This is the first destruction of the temple, right? And so we lose track. History loses track of all the treasures of the temple at this point. And there's some carvings that have been found in the ruins of the place that raided them the first time, okay, that show the warriors coming back with all the treasures. And one of them is the menorah, that the 7 candle holder. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Mezuzah or whatever. I don't know what it's called. I just said that because, anyway, you see them carrying these obvious treasures from Solomon's temple, but the ark isn't there. The ark is not present. Okay. And it would have been in those carvings if they'd have gotten it right. And there is the story of somebody that did capture it. They didn't destroy the temple, but they did capture the ark, but they gave it back because it was killing all of them. They were getting killed. They were like, basically the description sounds like they were getting cancer. And so they were like, come take the ark back, please, right? And the Jews were like, dumbasses.
You got to tie a rope to yourself if you're going to do this.
They got a rope going all the way back to Jerusalem. Well,
Haven't you ever heard of lead curtains?
That's right.
Yeah.
They wore vestments that had metal threads woven into it or whatever. But anyway, so he takes the ark from the temple and basically heads towards Egypt, which may have been its origin. It's not clear. I mean, it may not have been his origin, but it definitely. Okay, Egypt has a lot of arks. It has these boxes that are the same size. You see them in the drawings and in the paintings or whatever. And they may not necessarily be the Ark of the Covenant, but they built boxes that look just like that thing, what's described in the Bible. And since it was Moses that built it or had it built, who was taught in Egypt, it makes sense, right?
Right.
The Egyptians had this thing where they would put what they considered to be artifacts of God into these protective boxes that were then carried on long poles. So he takes it towards Egypt, but he decided for whatever reason, it may have been the political situation in Egypt at the time, but he decided not to go all the way into Egypt. So they stop somewhere on the Nile, and there is an island, and you can actually go see these ruins if you go to Egypt or whatever. You can look them up. But there's an island in the Nile, that's sort of between Jerusalem and Egypt or whatever. There's an island in the middle of the river that's long and narrow, and it has these ancient ruins of a temple on it, and the temple has the exact dimensions of Solomon's temple from Jerusalem. So it looks like they stopped on that island and freaking built a temple that was an exact copy of the one in Jerusalem and put the ark in it for a while. But then they had to leave there because the whatever horde that had destroyed Jerusalem kept coming, right? So they had to move on, and this is how the ark, they're going down the Nile so they end up in Ethiopia, and Ethiopia is very strange. I've looked into this, and I don't know why this is the case, but there's a lot of rock-cut temples there, a lot of them. And rock-cut temples are another subject entirely that they're not, so instead of the problem of how are they moving these giant blocks and how are they balancing these and how are they making them fit so perfectly, you have the problem of who decided, let's go up on this mountain that's just bare stone and start cutting. They start digging down and leave a temple, right?
Yeah.
Dig a hole that leaves a temple in it, right?
So that Indiana Jones can go through an obstacle course.
Right. I mean, like some of them, it's obvious that they had to be started from the top because it's literally in a hole in granite,
Yeah.
right?
It's freaking amazing.
And if you look at it, the very top of the temple, which is all these domes and stuff, but at the very top, there it starts with this like amazing lion figure, right? And then that is connected to the top of the dome that has all these designs on it. And it's this beautiful, perfect dome that goes down, and there's just carvings and things all. And like, how do you do that? How do you start from the top? And you're like, I'm carving the very top of the lion's head, right, and his ears, and I get down. We've got to finish his body. And okay. Because the story that's told about how they're built is like monks that were bored, that were just, they were just carving in their spare time. And it's no.
Yeah.
It's no. Anyway.
And they contain a bunch of processional measurements that have processional numbers and all this kind of stuff.
Right. And they're perfectly flat and perfectly square and all that. They have the same angle things that Christopher Dunn, where he's like, you have to use modern tools to measure the precision of these things. So Graham Hancock is in Ethiopia because a long time ago, he used to be a stringer, or he used to be a reporter for The Economist, which is like a famous British publication, like our Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
Okay. He was over there in Ethiopia during the time when there was a lot of upheaval going on or whatever. I mean, he talks about landing in Ethiopia. He said he took this like old school, it was a military plane, and they had to literally like almost fall to the airport. They were coming in real hot or whatever. And he said he remembered hearing like
snipper fire.
Yeah, snipper fire bouncing off the airplane or whatever. And he was like, I'm going to die. But anyway, when he got down there, he was fascinated with all these ancient buildings that are just sort of scattered around. Like, you've got these all these makeshift hovels and huts and stuff. But then you've got these just like astonishing rock cut things that just seem to spring up out of the ground, right? And in one place, he said he met this, it was a wizened old man who had cataracts in his eyes, who was a priest or a monk with these people that had these very ancient Hebrew beliefs. And that monk claimed to be guarding the Ark of the Covenant. Like the temple that he was in, it was a rock cut thing. It was a small thing, but it was a rock cut building that was basically just a few rooms. Right, and then there was a yard for it. Okay, so it had a rock fence. It was all rock cut stuff, and he never would leave. He never left the property of the temple itself, and no one else could go in. Graham Hancock couldn't go in either, but he was able to talk to the guy through the gate, and he kind of struck up a friendship with him or whatever. But the dude died like within weeks of him being there. It was weeks or months or whatever. It wasn't too long before the guy died, and Graham Hancock says that another man was chosen to take his place. There was always only one guy there. And once he was chosen, he could not ever leave. But they only lasted a few years because he said the man who was chosen first, he said that he fled. Like when he found out that he was picked, he was like, nah! And like he ran out of the city, and they caught him, or they either caught him or he came back. But he was a young man. And Graham Hancock said that like within a very short amount of time, he looked like a very old man with cataracts in his eyes and everything. And he was just, his skin was all, he looked like an old man. He had huge liver spots on, And again, they claimed it was because of the ark, right? And it was because once a day they were required to go into the room where it was or whatever. They had these rituals that they did. And so Graham Hancock eventually, this is my favorite part, he eventually asked the guy, like, why are you like this? What is the ark doing to you? And he said that the only thing the guy would tell him is that the ark is a thing of fire. And he says that it was obvious they were terrified of it, but
it's crazy.
Somehow they have this very deep set belief that they are the guardians of it. And that's what they do. They guard it, but it kills them. I mean,
just like it did in the,
right. They don't have the
stories
vestments
in the Bible.
Yeah. These guys don't have the right clothes or whatever.
But it would still kill them too.
Right.
Like in the stories of the Bible, that's why they tie a rope to them and, when they had to go in there to service it.
Yeah. So that's the idea. And like, I think that's
too bad they didn't have automation back then. Right. Computer, service the ark.
I want to know it. I mean, I would love to know what it is. But that does make sense. Like when you look at the instructions for building the ark, why it's all these materials layered.
Yeah.
Think of it, whatever it is that's in that box. If it wasn't in that box,
I wonder what the deal is with acacia wood. Like acacia.
it has DMT in it. That's
Yeah,
all
I know. And they have to build the ark out of acacia. It's like, well,
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe when it shines to that DMT, it makes it less damaging or something. I have no idea.
or more powerful.
Yeah, all the layers of gold and everything, it makes it look like it's shielding.
Yeah. So
But
that's
the one other interesting thing about that is that I can't remember if it's World War II or World War I. It might have been World War I, but Italy attempts to take Ethiopia. So the first war against the Nazis, right, or the Germans or whatever, when I guess they weren't really Nazis yet, but the first war against the Germans, and you have Mussolini, right, in Italy or whatever. They try to take Ethiopia, and I might be getting my history all mixed up, but I know that one of the European Western nations or whatever that was not on the Allies side, was on the Axis side, attempts to invade and take over Ethiopia. And Ethiopia kicks their asses. I mean, kicks their asses. And this is the only time ever in known history where, and this is going to sound racist or whatever, but it's true. The only time that an African army has defeated a Western European one ever. And the Ethiopians claim it is because they brought out the ark. And they just freaking, just like in all the biblical stories where the Israelites bring out the ark and whoever they're fighting, no matter how powerful, they just get their asses handed to them. The same thing happens here. It's very interesting.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So I was, I'm obviously learning all this from you're telling your story. But the reason why I brought it up originally was because this guy, this book of Enoch that had been lost, that all these legends referred to and everything,
right,
goes and finds it in Ethiopia. And then there's this other legend that Solomon, where they took the ark. Okay, and so when Solomon leaves his son with the keys to the kingdom and all that, he's like, well, I'm going to take these books and you can have this this library, but just give me this book and that book and that book and this thing and I'll go.
Yeah.
And so nobody knows where he went.
Right.
But there are stories about how he went to Ethiopia and, people are like, no one goes there.
Right.
But the guy goes and
somebody
finds
went there and cut those temples.
Finds this legendary book of Enoch. And Enoch, the book of Enoch is extremely unique. Yeah. In that this guy, he's the only one of these, the apocryphal texts or whatever that wrote in the first person.
Right. That's true.
He is taken up into the heavens and taught by God and the angels how to write and all this stuff, which we'd gone over before. Yeah. But he's recording it like a journal, and then he's
right. It looks like Ezekiel did. Right. Ezekiel kind of did it. He's saying, I see these things, I saw this. And then in the Revelations that he does that too. But you're right. It's that Enoch's book like that is it's unique amongst the Torah, the original early books, right?
And he's telling, he's telling this story of this crazy, fantastical story. And
I love that story.
But that becomes this legendary thing that these other ancient texts are referring to. Right. In many, many different places. And that he was supposed to have recorded all the knowledge of man before the flood to preserve it for those afterwards. And then you plug that in with everything, the seven sages, the God of wisdom, Thoth. Yes. Tahoti or whatever it is.
Tahoti, Thoth, however you say it.
I don't know. I'm just I'm just going back over all this and hearing it. It's interesting. I've listened to Graham Hancock's, books and hearing his way of expressing these things. And then I started this new book, and just the way this guy expresses it in different ways or explains things just slightly differently. Yeah. But we're talking about the same subjects. Right. It's suddenly I start drawing all these connections that I didn't know or realize before.
Okay, because you're hearing a second person.
Because I'm hearing another person describe it from in their own way of their path of research and what they've plugged in together. Right. And sort of lining it all up in a different way. Yeah. And it's just man,
Yes.
I have to stop listening to it in order to do anything important. So it's really great.
Yeah.
And it's just that computer voice, which I'm not even hearing anymore.
The thing about Enoch, and he was antediluvian. Okay, so I may have to wait to the next segment to get into this, but I've been looking at the so-called kings lists recently. Okay, because there's this thing with the kings list, and like we found them in quite a few places. Like the two main ones I could say now, Egypt, and this was a recent find because it was in the pyramid texts, and the pyramid texts are just like what it sounds like. They're in a pyramid, so but most pyramids have no writing. But underneath one, I think it's the pyramid at Dashur, but I can't be. I'm not certain which one it is. But basically, the pyramid is just like the ones it's not on Giza, but it's just like those. It's kind of out there in the desert, and it's just this gigantic pyramid out there. But there's nothing around it. Like unlike Giza, which has a whole necropolis where people were burying themselves around, all over the place. This pyramid's just kind of out there in the desert. And the story goes that, and this is fascinating to me because of the whole Anubis connection, like Anubis or Upaut, which is the ancient name for him, the dog, the Egyptian dog god, a jackal or whatever. So this guy was out, and I think he was a German, an archaeologist, but maybe not. That doesn't matter. But he basically was somewhere near that pyramid. They were doing some dig somewhere nearby, and he sees, and it's like dawn, right? So it's the time between times, dawning or whatever, and he sees this jackal. And it's just like standing there by itself, which is
rare.
Right. And they're usually in packs, and it's just one. And he sees it, and it's looking at him. And he described it as like, it was almost like, like Lassie. It's like, it wants you to follow it, right? It looks at you, and then it turns and trots, stops and looks back, right? And then turns and trots, and he's like, what? So he starts to follow it or whatever, just because, I don't know, you're in Egypt, follow stuff, right? So, and he says that it headed towards the pyramid. And because of the color of its fur or whatever, he said that when it got close to the pyramid, he started having trouble seeing it. But that also is like almost like it was like ephemeral or something, right? But basically, he said that it seemed to sort of go underneath it and just vanish into the sand. So he was like, "What the hell? Where did it go?" So he gets up there and he finds an entrance because of this dog that goes to a temple that's basically underneath the pyramid,
right?
And it contains the pyramid text. I mean, I would love to. Just imagining this thing. He gets down in their hallways, and the walls are full of writing carved into the stone. And this isn't in plaster like most Egyptian, the stuff they would put plaster over the stonework, and then they would carve into that because it's way easier, right? This is cut into the freaking rock. Yeah. And it is a whole bunch of things, but one of the things it contains is the king's list. But basically, at the very beginning of it starts with the scribes who are doing this, and they're from some ancient order that no longer exists. They said that they were committing these writings to stone because the documents they had were falling apart. Now, this is ancient scribes in ancient Egypt that were talking about. They had documents that were disintegrating. They were so old. So they were committing them to the stone, but they also say that like we don't really understand everything that's in these documents. Yeah. Okay. There's a lot of very, very, very like if you can get your hands on anything that talks about the pyramid text, look it up. There's very, very strange shit in there. But one of the things that there's a king's list, and all of Egyptology uses this king's list from the pyramid texts to give its chronology of Egypt.
Right.
Okay.
Except for the first part.
Right, which is most of it because it goes back 30,000 years.
Yeah.
So they do this ridiculous thing where they're like, this is the source text for the history of Egypt, except for the beginning, which is bullshit.
Right. It's like the inventory stela.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, this somebody carved all of this stuff in stone, but because it doesn't match our...
It's a hoax.
Because it doesn't match what we think happened, it's invented.
Right. It's a hoax. Whatever. You're like, okay. But so the king, and this is the fascinating thing. In Sumer, they found a king's list. Many of them actually, because it's basically when you talk about Sumerian stuff, you're basically talking about three different cultures. It's all kind of because it's Sumer, and then it's Akkadian, and then it's Assyria. Mm-hmm. And they all use the sort of and Babylon. My bad. So They all use the sort of cuneiform type writing, but they're basically one after the other. I don't remember the progression, but Sumer's the first one. But any text from any of the next the that later cultures are presumed to be copied because they basically say these are from the Sumerian, right? So there's a Sumerian kings list, and they found, I think, like 8 or 9 of them or whatever. And they're all none of them are exactly the same, but they're so close to being the same that you can basically say they are the same thing, but it's just whoever was writing it had their own style. Okay. And the best one is actually, it's a square. It's like a square pillar that has a round hole through the middle. It looks like a spindle. It used to be set on something where you could spin it. Like, like a sunglasses thing or whatever. And see all sides of it because it's written on all sides. And it's got the king's list or whatever, and it's the same deal. There is the antediluvian kings, which is pre-flood, and there's the post-diluvian ones. And when you see the kings after the flood, they have normal lifespans or normal reign times that, so this guy reigned for 27 years. This guy reigned for 13. This guy reigned for 9. This guy reigned for 42, right? Well, when you go to the antediluvian ones, the numbers are ridiculous. At least that, this guy reigned for 36,000.
Right.
This dude reigned for 28,000. This guy reigned for 17,000. The Egyptian kings, pharaohs, this is the same one, but it further subdivides the antediluvian kings into the Shemsu, the Bene Elohim is what we would call what the Hebrews called them. Okay, but it's also the Shemsu Hor, the sons of Horus.
Right.
Bene Elohim means the sons of God, or the sons of the gods. Right. So you have the first 4, I think, are just listed as straight up gods. This is Zep Tepi, the first time, and they have really long reign times, or hundreds of thousands of years or whatever. Then there's the Shemsu Hor, the sons of Horus, or the followers of the sons of Horus. And those guys have the reign times that are down in the thousands or tens of thousands of years. And then you have the flood. And it's either 10 or 8. Okay? There's some lists that have 8 antediluvian kings, and then there's some that have 10. What's fascinating is the biblical record has 8 antediluvian patriarchs. From Adam to Noah are 8 heads of family.
Whoa.
And just like we all know, or not everybody knows, but most people know that the lifetimes given in the very early Genesis are like ridiculously long. Methuselah was
not looking at that brain explosion. Didn't even see it.
Yeah. It doesn't give a lifetime for Adam, I don't think, but Methuselah is like the longest lived person in the Bible at 900 and something, almost 1,000 years long. Noah was, the flood for Noah happened when he was 600 and something. And then after the flood, when God's like, so the lifetime of man will be to 120 years. And after that, except for Noah's sons who do live a long time. I think Ham was 300 something. But anyway, their lifespans drastically shrink down to normal levels.
Give me some raw glasses so I can look cool while I'm walking away from this brain explosion.
So how do we have these disparate cultures like Sumer and Egypt? You could say that they were somewhat contemporary, but it doesn't look like they did a lot of sharing of cultural stuff. But people there was some idea that they did, but it isn't close enough to be shared. It more looks like they have a shared heritage. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That there was some even more older previous culture that they both had inherited stuff from, rather than that they directly shared things. Right. And then you have the biblical. So you have these 3 different ones. And then, of course, in the Americas, there's the same deal where you have these. Now, the writings here are all gone because of the devastation of cultural stuff that happened when the Europeans came. But there's enough left. And there's the legends that were recorded where you get this. There's 8 or 10 pre-flood rulers of some kind, right? Gods or whatever they call them. And the Americas has its own Babel story. Yeah. The Chalupa, gigantic, massive pyramid that they still haven't managed to uncover all. Just
Cholpa? Is that what
it's not Cholpa. It's, I can't remember how to say it. But it's
a chalupa is like a taco.
Right.
It's open-faced taco.
It means they basically, it's not a chalupa. But Cholpa.
Well, a chalupa is sort of like a round pyramid of taco.
It's something like that. Cholpa is the towers, but that's not what this is. But it's basically, this pyramid is so big that they built a cathedral on top of it thinking it was a hill.
Oh, yeah.
You can look at the pictures.
Isn't that Darren? No.
No. I don't know what it's called. It starts with a CH. That's all I know.
The one that they thought was a mountain, and they were like, wait, that's a pyramid.
That's in Indonesia.
Oh, okay.
That's Gunung Padang.
Gunung
yeah.
Padang,
Yeah.
Never mind.
Yeah. It
Getting all
starts
my...
right. This is in. I think this is in.
Gunung Padang.
This is in Indonesia, and it's like I'm sorry. This is in Mexico, and it's huge. I mean, like you can see the pictures of the hill, and you can see the cathedral, and the cathedral's gigantic, but it's like this little. It looks like a little bitty building on top of this huge hill. But at the base of the hill, you see they've uncovered one corner of the pyramid, and it's fucking massive.
Holy shit!
It's fucking gigantic, and the legends of it is that was the Babel Tower. And it's the same legend. They were building this. They didn't call it Babel, but they were like, the man was here and he was like full of himself, and he was building this massive building that was going to have its tops in the heavens. And God said, "WTF?" and like and like confused them. And
that's crazy.
And I mean, this is the largest building ever found anywhere ever. It's gigantic.
So we're gonna have to take a break, but I wanted to say one quick thing that is probably wrong now after listening to you explain all this. But I was thinking, but I'm just gonna throw this out there because you never know.
Yeah.
Listening to this new book again, they talk about the pyramid texts, right, being discovered, and of course, I had just listened to a portion about the casing stones of the Great Pyramid that were covered in writing,
Right.
that was like could have filled libraries full of it. So it just occurred to me, like, what if the pyramid texts were a copy of what was written on the Great Pyramid?
Oh man, that would be great.
That they were trying to copy. So it's deteriorating, and they're like, we have to copy this down because it's so old.
That's fascinating.
But of course, if the timeline of the Egyptologists have is right, then that can't be right.
Right.
But they may be wrong about the timeline. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there like that. That would be
Well, I
freaking
might
badass.
be wrong in the idea that the casing stones were put there by the most recent workers. That would but if it was put there by the original builders and then somebody carved into it later, or even the original guys did it, then it could be freaking ridiculously ancient. And
And they were copying it down because they were seeing that it was getting eroded in some places, and they're like, dude, it's gonna be destroyed, so let's copy this down.
Yeah, that's totally possible. That's completely possible.
And then I have something else to say about Göbekli Tepe, but I'll wait. I got
T-pillars
right.
and snakes.
snacks.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents, to Brothers of the Serpent podcast, coming to you from our 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science, nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed high atop the Edwards Plateau. We have been discussing a lot of things, but we're back on the Babel subject, and which is endlessly fascinating for us, like pyramids. And I was talking about that there are Babel legends in South America, and in Central and in Mexico that connect with this gigantic taco, right? The chalupa.
Yeah, the chalupa pyramid in Burrito, Mexico.
Right. Damn it! I need to find out what it's really called.
And of course, we didn't look anything up while we were on
Right,
break.
no, because we were seeing aliens.
Yeah, we were seeing flashy thingies in the sky, making us forget about what we were talking about.
What were we talking about? Yeah.
I did say that I wanted to mention something about Göbekli Tepe, but I'll bring that up later because I'd rather stick to this subject we're on right now, and it sort of ties in. But
Yeah.
anyway.
So, like, I'm pretty much finished with where I was going with all that stuff. So let's hear what you were going to say about Babel.
Well, I've been thinking. I'm always thinking about Babel in terms of like what is this universal language that man was all about, and you brought it up to me. I don't remember what you were bringing up to me at work.
I'd like to point out real quick too. I'd like to point out that linguists, like actual, I don't know, language scientists, they are all of the opinion that there is an original source language or whatever. There's one original human language. So it's interesting how that connects to Babel. You know, like obviously most of them would poo-poo that whole thing, but they do believe that there's a source language, an original human tongue. So,
yeah. So it just occurred to me that there's this word in the Bible, knowing, or to know, and it has this sort of strange meaning and used in these strange places that make it sound like reproduction.
right.
Okay, so
Right. He knew his wife.
Right.
And they begat a son. Yeah.
exactly, Adam knew his wife Eve, and they begat Cain.
Right. That's a lie.
Right. So the tree, the fruit of the tree of knowledge,
Yeah.
could be then interpreted to be something about, reproductive abilities or whatever. Knowledge being the ability or something having to do with reproduction.
Right. And okay.
And so knowing and knowledge and to know your spouse or whatever, and right,
Yeah.
it has this it's always used in that context in the Torah. So that got me thinking.
Righteous is also used that way. We kind of mentioned this
in terms of lineage,
right?
Like,
righteous meant that it was correct somehow. It was like
like your lineage was correct.
Yeah,
righteous in all his generations.
Yeah, yeah.
So that, like, I was thinking about that, and then the Babel subject came up between us, and it occurred to me that maybe there's another possibility of this idea of language, right? That's referenced this one time in Genesis. I don't know how often language is referenced or spoken about in the Bible.
Tongue, they would say too.
Yeah, when all of man was of one language.
Right.
It occurred to me that maybe language was something like bloodline or race or genetics, something about genetics.
Right.
Right. So we know that genes are like a language.
Right.
Right. The
Definitely.
code is a language. So I started thinking of it in those terms. Like, what if that's what was being referenced there? When all of mankind is of one language. In other words, when we're all of the
one
same
lineage.
of the one lineage,
Yeah.
then there's nothing. So we're all together. There is no racism. There's no any of this stuff. And then what happens? Like, well, we must confuse their tongue, right? Again,
Right.
let's say it was genetics, so that they will be scattered throughout the earth. And when we look at today, the way it is today, it's like we're all divided by race and where are you from? And all that kind of stuff. So I don't know. I just started thinking of it in that way, and that is just very interesting to me to think about. I haven't really,
and
gone much further than that, but
describe that. And the post Babel description of what happens is like they couldn't understand each other, so they kind of grouped into little groups that did understand each other, or that did. Or I would say they spoke the same language, right?
Right. They went all their separate ways,
and they all went their separate ways or whatever, and like scattered across the earth. So you can imagine that was some kind of.
But still, like thinking of the stories and the quote unquote parables of the ancient texts, and even the way the constellations and the stories associated with each age are described and told in these very human terms of people and attitudes and personalities and stuff, used to describe some deeper hidden knowledge that is very real.
Right.
And scientific, right? So it's not far-fetched to imagine that was what was being referred to, that the tower could have been both a physical tower that was being built, but also a tower of knowledge.
Yeah.
Okay, and knowledge
An
both
obelisk.
in the knowing, like the knowing of our minds and our history and science, but also a tower of knowing in terms of reproduction,
Right. Of bloodlines.
Of bloodlines.
Yeah.
Okay, and what are all these like ancient civilizations or not civilizations, but say the rulers of the world, what are they concerned with?
Yeah.
Blood.
Their blood.
Their bloodlines must be pure. They are one language. Like they must stay this one thing.
Right.
They can't the Jewish people don't marry outside.
Right.
You can see that through all these different cultures.
The noble classes of England did the same thing. They're very sort of clannish.
Yeah.
And they were like highly concerned with their bloodlines and like who has the right to rule and like.
Exactly. And so then you can associate the will of God.
Yeah.
In terms of what was done at the Tower of Babel, that we were separated on purpose, and this is the way we were supposed to be, to remain divided and spread throughout the earth. That these factions of people are like, okay, it's now the rule of God that we should not marry outside and we don't intermingle with the other races and whatever.
Right, that was part of the rule of Babel. Yeah, that's interesting too.
So I don't know.
That makes me think of like, 'cause with all this stuff, I always go back to, I start looking at the Sumerian stuff. I start sifting in my mind through all the Sumerian stuff that I know, trying to think of like, where does this connect here? Like one of them would be that always drives me nuts when we start talking about this is the word ruler that we use.
Yeah.
I'm just like, damn it, because when you look at the Sumerians described it, and this happened. The king. Okay, when it says that, it's very interesting how they describe it. Kingship was brought down from heaven.
Right.
Okay, and that happens after in the King's List, because I'm going back to this. I was looking at the King's List. In the King's List, the gods rule directly.
Right.
At first, when it becomes the what the Jews called the Bene Ha Elohim, the sons of God. That is when the first kingship is brought down from heaven. And it keeps getting shifted from city to city. Like, so the King's List will tell you it was the kingship was brought down from heaven to the city of Eridu. And then it was given to blah, blah, blah. And whatever his name is. And he rules for so many thousands of years. And then this guy rules for so many thousands of years. And then it was removed to Ur.
Oh my God. Like,
What?
It just occurred to me, the dynasty, the kingship, these long periods could be referring to a genetic lineage, a bloodline, as opposed to a single person, but they're referring to the bloodline as a name.
Yeah. Many people have thought that. We're looking at the King's List. Yeah. I mean, that's awesome that you came to that just now by yourself. Cause like I've read that like actual, archaeologists and anthropologists that are studying this and write whole papers on that exact concept that they're talking about a dynasty
Right. But bringing the kingship down from heaven would be that the gods, quote unquote, bring their genetics down to man and give it to man. So they like the sons of God took the daughters of men, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
They mix their bloodline with man. And this is why the kings and all the quote unquote rulers are like, oh, can't mix bloodlines.
Right. And that's why you see later on the whole divine right of kings.
Right. Divine right of kings.
Because it was the idea that they are appointed by God.
So their language was given to them by God.
Right. But if you look at what the Sumerians described the original king's duties, he was like because the gods had ruled directly for so long previous to this, and you kind of get the idea that they kind of get tired of it. There's so many humans, and they're not a lot of gods, and like they're sort of, it's too much micromanaging, right? And the gods like want a sort of a go-between, right? So that the king becomes a buffer between the gods and the humans that are being directed or whatever. So the king isn't actually going around. Okay, well, what I should say is the king himself is not the one making the decisions.
He's to take the measure of man and take the measure of the kingdom.
And if you look at his main duty, it was as a surveyor. His job was to make sure that, because there are all these tasks that these humans need to do. Because again, you have to look at this in terms of the Sumerian idea that humans are basically the labor for these gods, right? And so the god has his temple, which is his house, and there's this sprawling city around the temple. But that city really is just for the people to provide the god with all this crap, because the gods get pretty decadent towards the end of their like direct contact and direct existence on Earth or whatever. They're just like, there's the corpulent mother, the statues they found of the fat goddess. She's just like humongously fat and always laying on her side or whatever, but they treated her as the Earth mother. And they're just constantly bringing her food. And, that's basically the human's job, was to just give these gods all this stuff. So people need plots of land. They need buildings, survey, So the king's job was to survey all this. He was supposed to rule, to measure, to rule like a ruler, as in like 12 inches long. Fuck. But how did that word also become connected to like controlling everybody?
Yeah.
It becomes connected to controlling everybody because
bow down, I am your surveyor.
that doesn't really work. Yeah, but to rule, is to measure. So that has always driven me nuts. But the thing about the languages and the I'm remembering a Sumerian tablet that was found that was like basically a scribe. Okay, so like one of the specific like jobs, I guess you could say, careers in the ancient times was to be somebody who knew how to read and write.
Right.
You weren't writing novels though. You weren't a freaking author because it was still really hard to and the materials were scarce. Well, in Sumer the materials weren't scarce, but you were like basically writing on clay with a stick. So it wasn't easy. You couldn't write a book or whatever.
Yeah, or using the Rolling Stone copy machine.
The Rolling Stone copy machine. Yeah.
The Xerox.
Right. Why does it start with an X? Wait, it starts with a Z.
Alien.
Yeah. No, it does start with an X. That's right.
Yeah.
Other rocks.
Alien rocks.
He's talking about, by the
Reproduction
way,
machine. The
he's
cylinder
talking about
seals.
cylinder seals, so that like artisans would carve, like you get a cylinder of clay and they would carve into it. So it's low relief. They carve into it a scene with words or whatever, and then when you rolled that across some other wet clay, it would leave a high relief image.
And they did it the other way, where they would carve it in high relief and then roll across, and it would be
low relief. Yeah.
But they also did it with granite.
Yeah, it's granite cylinder seals. Like, how are they? What were they cutting that with?
Yeah, they did high relief granite cylinder seals.
Yeah,
like,
that's
freaking
yeah
badass.
And they did it with giant, like large balls of stone. No, I don't think so. Copper needles? Nope. But I'm thinking of this specific tablet that it was a scribe, and it's basically it's a plea to the gods to return to him his language. So it's post Babel, okay, and he's basically begging, please, like, give this back to me, like he feels bereft, like, he's basically begging, like, please, like, so, but he's writing, so it's like, what did they really take? See, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to connect to what you were talking about. Like,
I see. Yeah.
He's writing this down, so,
maybe,
but of course,
maybe they took his knowing from him, like he wasn't able to reproduce
something that he lost in the Babel thing. And it's obvious that he's begging because he calls it the confusion of tongues. Like he somehow lost. But okay, so the idea,
dude. Oh my god! I just realized
had one.
I just realized this is a little off the subject there, but what we talked about with Ethan, the family, the one family that was around the tower that was saying, hey, we didn't engage, like we did not take part in the tower.
Right.
Maybe what they were saying is we're not of that lineage.
Yeah.
And so then you have a bunch of red-headed giants over here that nobody ever knew about. Like, where did they come from?
Yeah.
They were not of that lineage. And so they were like, spare us of the confusion.
And so yeah. And so the idea is that in the Tower of Babel, confusion of tongues, that there was no one group that was left with the original tongue.
Right.
So this is why the scribe, but everybody had a language, okay?
And so that makes sense that when they brought down the kingship from heaven, so
they had to infuse the.
So if they removed the knowing, the ability to reproduce from most of the people, and then they brought kingship down from heaven, which kingship was the proper lineage, the righteous lineage, and only gave it to the rulers,
right,
of the chosen ones or whatever that were going to lead the
Gilgameshes,
the new tribes.
Yeah.
So they had all these different ones and then they scattered them based
Right.
on that. Like they couldn't reproduce anymore except for these chosen few that had all the separate.
Okay, so you're suggesting that it was actually so what the scribe was begging for was to have back was the ability to reproduce? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, maybe so.
Okay.
Like
I hadn't thought of it that way.
I'm trying to
I always
plug-
viewed it as an original language, and I always view the original language as being almost magical in power.
right, me too. But
Okay.
I'm trying to plug all of this.
But you're saying that the language is actually something else completely.
I'm just trying to plug all of this stuff into this idea and see how it fits. Like this idea that language was some genetic thing,
Right.
like knowing is a reproductive thing.
It could be all of those things. Because think of it, if there is a sort of an inherent language, it would be in the genetics.
Right. So this is what we talked about the other day. Well, they came down and they chopped up all the genes and they put all this meaningless crap in there.
Right. That's
and
why
this
we
is
have
why-
junk DNA.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is just like I don't believe this. Again, this is one of the things that we do.
Right, we're just
at
hashing this out
Brothers
just
of the
now.
Serpent, Snake
Yeah.
Bros. We come up with an idea and then falsify it. So like take all of this information that we have and see if it plugs in and if it can work that way, and if it continues to work as we plug in more
You
ideas.
just
or like
keep it in mind, but it
yeah,
doesn't
you
mean
keep it
it's
in mind.
true. Yeah.
We don't really know. It's something else that's a possibility, and then if you keep that in mind, then maybe some other piece of information will be like, boom, yeah. And then if language or tongue was actually had a secondary meaning genetics, that might reveal some other hidden meaning in something else. It's totally unrelated to Babel.
Right. Well, to any skirp derps out there that think that the ancient peoples didn't know about genetics, take a look at the caduceus, which is still used today for the symbol of medical whatever. Like it's on hospitals. It's the staff with the snakes.
Snakes. We're on staffs.
Right. And the snakes are in a double helix.
Right.
And that is from, it goes back to at least to ancient Egypt. Like when you think, like when I first realized that blew my mind. Like, and this is a while back, but I was like, holy crap, that symbol on hospitals today that we know, we think of it as symbolizing genetics, those snakes that are intertwined like that, is from Egypt, at least. And Egypt may have got it from somewhere before then. It was actually the symbol of Tehoti, the god of knowledge. It was inscribed on the Serapeum, which is the underground. It's the underground thing that they say was a hospital, but it's the one that has those gigantic, empty granite coffins in it.
Yeah.
So the caduceus is a fascinating symbol. I mean, like, how do they know the double helix if they didn't know about genetics? It's very strange.
Two snakes.
Two snakes, serpents, and there you go. That's knowledge.
Yep, the serpent is
That's right.
giver of knowledge.
That's right. Knowing. So, okay, I want to shift the subject a bit here. Very recently, there was a...
Hey, I just want to say real quick
All right,
before you
right.
change.
Go ahead.
I'm going to put my cartouche on that theory.
Damn, I want a cartouche. I want shoulder rivers. That's what I want.
Yeah.
Shoulder rivers and a bowling pin hat.
I want a bowling pin hat.
Shoulder rivers, dude.
You can have delicious bass in those shoulder rivers.
Just if anybody's wondering what we're talking about, look at ancient depictions of Enki. He has shoulder rivers.
Yeah, and bowling pin hats are on pretty much all of the
Egyptian gods.
Egyptian gods that are carved into the walls. They're
Yeah.
bowling pin hats.
Like there's a great one, and I think
With
it's
serpent gates. Bowling pin hats with serpent gates. And like the more badass you are, the more wide your serpent gates are
open, yeah, on your bowling pin hat.
Yeah. Anyway, you can go change the subject.
So there was the Joe Rogan podcast, which is it's a great podcast if anybody's, like a lot of I usually will look through what he's got, and he talks to a lot of other people who are either fighters, which is okay, or comedians, which is all right. But like whenever he's got scientists or doctors or somebody who's not a fighter or comedian, I'll usually listen to that show, and he's had some fascinating shows on there. And he's had Graham Hancock on many times. Okay. He's had Randall Carlson on many times. Actually, Randall Carlson got his, I don't know if I'd say it was, Randall Carlson's been giving conferences and talks for decades, but I think he really kind of his popularity kind of exploded when he was on the Joe Rogan show, because like Joe Rogan has 90 million downloads a month or whatever, you know, so, like immense coverage. Anyway, recently he had a show where it was he's had several shows since the Magicians of the Gods with Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson together. Those are fascinating shows. And then the most recent one he just did had Michael Shermer on there, Michael Shermer is like a big name, famous skeptic. Okay. Like skeptic as in like he toes the line of the mainstream. He thinks this is all bullshit and we're all full of crap.
He's a skeptic in terms of that he totally believes everything that the mainstream says.
Right. That's what we call skirp derp. Because true skeptics in the Greek tradition were supposed to question everything forever. It isn't that you just say, no, this is what it is and you're dumb. It's that you don't ever accept anything, right? That's what the true meaning of a skeptic was in the ancient Greek times, and they've taken that name now, but they're anything but. But on the other hand, I will say about in his defense, I think he made an effort to present the skeptic point of view, the scripter point of view, in a polite way. He was not trying to be rude, because a lot of these guys they're just incredibly abrasive. Okay, you look at the way they write about stuff, and they're like incredibly condescending and just so. I mean, just it's hard to read or hard to listen to them because they're just so stuck up and, you know.
Yeah. Well, they know everything,
right? And they think that you're incredibly dumb, and that you don't know anything,
which is true,
right? That's true,
yeah.
But it's, it's not nice to say.
Yeah, we don't know anything.
So I want to say that in his defense that he didn't come across as abrasive or whatever, but still there were times when he was saying stuff where you're just like, oh my God, because he's basically just being incredibly condescending. But anyway, the point I wanted to say, I just want to bring up one point. There was this debate, and the reason they had this debate is because Michael Shermer was like, you guys say that no one will debate you. Well, here I am, right? So that was great. And he got his ass handed to him. But especially when Randall Carlson, because Randall, he knows his shit. Now Graham has written books where he is speculating, and these guys love that because they just try to take you apart. But of course, Graham is like number one, worked for The Economist, knows how to reference his shit, and is incredibly knowledgeable about this stuff. So he handed his ass to him. But when Randall Carlson talked, like Michael Shermer didn't even like approach anything that Randall said, because like you could just tell that like Randall fucking knew what he was talking about. But there was this one part where they were discussing specifically the Sphinx and the research on the Sphinx and all that stuff that got a whole bunch of this started, right? The
Sphinx enclosure.
Yeah, Robert Schock.
There's erosion on the Sphinx enclosure.
These stones look thousands of years old. Yeah, so Schock and John Anthony West first presented the idea of I shouldn't say that. The idea was out there before from Schwaller, but he was not
a geologist. He was really just
he just sort of mentioned
he knew some stuff about geology and was just looking at it like, man, this looks like water erosion.
Right. And so John Anthony West reads that in Schwaller's book and says like, whoa, what? Hold on a second. So
we're talking about the Sphinx enclosure here, the water erosion on the Sphinx enclosure.
Right. So
erosion.
Yeah. So and it would be on the body of the Sphinx too, but it's been repaired so many times that you can't see the original stone. But the enclosure itself, the walls around the Sphinx, because the Sphinx, for anybody that doesn't know, the Sphinx was made by basically digging out around an outcrop until they had enough rock left over to make it. So they dug it out like a rock cut temple. You dig down and make it and leave a Sphinx, right?
Yeah.
But there was an original outcrop that stuck up, and that's where the head was and all that stuff. So they kind of dug around. But so they had to dig this box out of the stone, and then they took that stone that they dug out and made temples nearby. And by the way, those temples are made of humongous, gigantic limestone blocks that are heavily eroded. I mean, they are.
Right.
They've been since cased in granite by somebody who came along later, and just like the basalt platform of the Giza Plateau, they shaped the backsides of the granite blocks to fit the erosion of the limestone ones. So you can tell that the limestone blocks were already incredibly ancient when somebody came along to put the granite on them. That is now incredibly ancient too, right?
So anyway, yeah.
So John Anthony West looks at he realizes that this does look like water erosion on the Sphinx enclosure. He brings Robert Schock in, who's a geologist he had tenure at Boston University. He is now like the head geologist there or whatever. But at the time he was a young dude. He brings him in to look at him. John Anthony West brings him to Egypt to look at and Schock, as a geologist, is like, yeah, this is a specific kind of water erosion from heavy rainfall. It isn't. It can't
Not
be
the flooding of the Nile.
right. It can't be from water like from standing water or water running across the ground. It has to directly be raining onto it, right? And the only the most recent time that Egypt has had a heavy rainfall is at least 9,000 years ago. Maybe even as far back as 9,000 BC, which is 2,000 years before 9,000 years ago. So they present this theory, and of course is
extremely close to the time when Göbekli Tepe was built.
It basically looks like you can kind of pinpoint it around the 11,500
right
years.
With the
the end of the Younger Dryas and all that
the
stuff.
accuracy rating of all that
Right.
stuff is like the window.
Yes,
They're all in the same place. But anyway,
yeah.
sorry.
So in the Joe Rogan podcast with Michael Shermer and John Hancock and Randall Carlson, they're talking about this, and Shermer he says he has this thing that he says that he's like, well, this is like so many other things in this that you guys take. There will be anomalies in things like that, So we have all this evidence of this particular thing, and then there's like an anomaly on this side and an anomaly on that side or whatever. You guys are basing all of your ideas off this one anomaly when we have all this other evidence that is, and I'm like,
Wrong.
right.
Wrong.
I mean, you probably see it immediately, but like I couldn't, neither Randall nor Hancock said this, and I was just like, okay, it is not an archeological anomaly.
Right.
This is a geological
fact that has supporting
it's not
information.
anomalous at all.
Right.
In geology. But yeah,
It's anomalous to the Egyptology.
Right.
Because they've come up with a...
I'm glad that you saw it immediately too, because like that was driving me nuts. He was just like, well, I mean, that's this one anomaly, and if you just look at that, then maybe you can come to these conclusions. But there's all this evidence that is to the I'm like, no. Number one, it's not an anomaly. It's in a completely different science. One that's a hard science, no pun intended. Geology having to do with rocks is a hard fucking science. Archaeology is not a hard science. It is a lot of conjecture, and it has to be, because you're digging up human things made by human people, and you don't really know because they're ancient lost cultures, and so you're having to sort of like fit. You're having to
understandably so.
Right, understandably so. But the idea that they think that they treat it like it's hard fact, and it's not. Right. Whereas geology over here is hard fucking fact written in fucking hard ass fucking stone. Okay,
right.
Sorry about all the F-bombs there, but like, it's not anomalous in the science that it came from.
Right.
And so him saying, well, this is an anomaly, I'm just like, oh my God. But let that stand for how these skeptics operate all the time. The things that they say are always like that. They're disingenuous. They're sneaking around certain points, and if you call them out on it, they're like, okay, well, and then they change the subject, right? It's just, anyway, it was a fascinating show if anybody wants to listen to it, but you have to stop it. I had to stop it multiple times because I was like, oh my God, throw my headphones off. God damn it. I mean, he was still pushing the Clovis first, which is... mainstream out now actually has discarded the Clovis first thing. There have been sites that point back to 24,000 years ago, and there's another one that points to 108,000 years ago. An article just came out in Nature about it. So it's like, but he was poo-pooing all that, and all three of them, Randall, Graham Hancock, and Joe Rogan, were like, dude, you haven't done your homework, because that, like, the Clovis first thing that's over. Like, it's been over for a while. And he's like, well, no, you're talking about anomalies. And I'm like, that's not anomalies. There's multiple sites. Anyway, it's a good show if you can handle it. I just wanted to say that thing about he tries to say that's an archaeological anomaly, but it's not. It's geology. So, all right, we can change subject. I got that off my chest.
Well, we could just. I think we could take a break.
Oh yeah, we could take a break, and we'll come back for the last segment and talk about
anomalous snakes.
lie that I tell well. Let it fall on closed eyes and deaf ears, just as long as you can tell.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Snake Bros. Final segment from our Tangent Cube of Science. We are discussing things.
Hard science.
Hard science. Discussing hard and soft sciences. And
Triangles.
pyramids made of food. Oh, this is a terrible intro. Anyway, Russ has his intros down pat.
Not really. I messed up the last one too.
But yeah, we're going back to pyramids. We're still talking about pyramids. There's an infinite amount of things to talk about pyramids.
Yeah, which seems like it should be impossible because they're finite structures.
Yeah, but
There's an infinite number of things. They unfold into an infinite number of triangles made by serpents.
the cyclopean blocks.
It's a freaking triangle snake. All right, so what was the first thing we were gonna go back to? Well, one thing is interesting is that the Great Pyramid, and this was hard for me to understand at first because I've been looking at all these measurements, the science of metrology, really, which is like how to, what measurements. We have all these standards, the foot, the meter, the mile, the nautical mile, the pace, the inch. So
The cubit.
yes, and
The
then there's
furlong.
the cubit and the royal cubit. The pyramid cubit or whatever. There's all the furlong. And there's several fascinating things about that. But the foot, the first guy to do a really detailed survey of the Great Pyramid, basically determined that the foot is the base measure of that structure.
Right.
So that makes that measurement really old. Even if it's just as old as the Egyptologists think that pyramid is, that's still almost 3000 BC. That's really old. But the foot is also based on if you take the circumference of the earth and then you divide it by the number of degrees in a circle times 1,000, so you divide it by 360,000, you get the exact number of days in the mean tropical year, which is the year, the astronomical year where the sun basically does one complete cycle. And this is strange, but that's different. If you look at the stars, the fixed stars, and you try to like do the same thing where you wait till that star comes right back to its original position, you get a different year than you do if you're watching the sun.
And that's because of precession.
Right. Well, is it because we're closer? I'm not really sure why that happens. Well, and also the idea that the sun is wobbling because there's pulls of the planets and everything.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what the purpose, the reason for it is, but
I think every year the positions of the stars change like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Or something.
Yeah. Like 20 minutes of arc. Is that?
Yeah. 20 minutes of arc.
Yeah. So the mean tropical year is based on watching the sun. Okay. So, and that's the base measurement we use for our...
Or 20 seconds. I'm sorry.
Right. 20 seconds of arc. Yeah. 20 minutes would be way too long.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the mean tropical year is based on the sun, and that's what we use with the Gregorian calendar, which is what we use now. So it's 365.24 something days. Okay. Almost 365 and a quarter days. It's really close to that. So if you bust out your calculator and put in the
All right. I'll bust out my calculator.
yeah. So the circumference of the Earth at the equator is 24,901 miles. Now you multiply that by the number of feet in a mile, which is 5,280, and that's also connected to precession. I can't remember all the details about that. So you get a big, like 131, whatever. What do you got?
Yeah. 131,477,280.
Right. Now, yes, that's the number of feet, the circumference of the Earth in feet. Now divide that by 360,000.
60,000. 365.21466666667.
Right. So that is the number of days in the year to an accuracy of 99.994%.
That's freaking badass.
Because if you divide that again by the actual, and I don't remember the exact number, you'd have to go look up the exact number, but 365.24, whatever the actual number of days in the year is, you're going to get 0.999999999. It's going to be, that's how accurate it is. It's almost exactly 1, which is what you should get if you're looking for the foot. You see what I'm saying? So
Yeah,
that's how you could say that one. So you basically take the circumference of the Earth with no units associated with it, just however long that is, right? Just you measure it with a string, okay?
Right, wrap a string around the Earth.
And then you divide that string 360,000 times, and you take that length that you've got left over and divide that by the exact number of days in the mean tropical year, and you get a foot. Okay, that is what the foot is based on. What?
Where are my freaking raw glasses? I'm walking away from explosions.
And the pyramid, the Great Pyramid, was based on the foot. And so this is why it's interesting. It's like metrology and, geology. Like basically that geology is like
geometry.
And yeah, geology and geometry. Like the geometry is the study of the Earth.
And measurement
of the Earth. Yeah,
measure.
Earth measure. And I don't know. I love that fact because people are like, it's based on some ancient king's like foot. And I'm like, no, dude, it's not.
Right. And not only that, but we like we said before, if you take the length of two sides of the base of the Great Pyramid,
right,
you take that length, that is the distance that any given point on the equator will travel in 1 second
due to rotation
of the Earth. Like
that's another. Yeah, you gotta have raw glasses the whole time you're studying the Great Pyramid. It's like constant explosions. Oh man!
And so, okay, this is another thing that I think I brought this up before. I can't remember if I did. There's just so many things to bring up. But okay, so you know how the relationship of pi, the radius to the circumference of a circle is represented in the pyramid. That the height of the pyramid is related to the total circumference of the base, or
yes.
You add up the measurement of the four sides of the base of the pyramid,
right?
And it is the same relationship to the pyramid's height that the radius is to the circumference of a circle,
right? And that is a geometrical mystery called
I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's a geometrical mystery of squaring the circle,
right?
There's this whole problem of like, if I give you a circle, can you make a square that has the same circumference as the circle, or the other way around? And they did it by extruding it into the third dimension.
Right. And
fascinating.
So the degree of angle of the sides of the pyramid had to be very, very specific in order to get the height to be the relationship to the measurement of the base that represents pi to like the fourth.
Yeah, it's ridiculously high accurate. Yeah,
like 3.14159 or some shit they got is like crazy how far they went.
Right. Again, it's 99.99996 accuracy or whatever.
Right. So to get that height, they had to have this very specific angle of the sides that go up, which is
51.
Like it's basically 52 degrees.
Right.
It's extremely close to 52 degrees.
Yeah.
And the angle of the descending passage that goes down in is half of that, 26 degrees.
Oh. I didn't know
So
that.
like when I heard those numbers, I was just like, dude, like playing cards.
Right. 52, 26. Yeah.
And so and
then the weeks in the year.
And then, yeah. Oh shit.
There's 52 weeks in the
I
year.
said, yeah, like I had thought of that, but I hadn't yet.
Okay, I do that all the time. It's cool.
So playing cards are based off of the original, the tarot.
Right.
The tarot deck.
Divination.
Okay.
And stuff, yeah.
So the tarot comes from ancient Egyptian symbolism.
Yes.
And the classical, deck of cards is derived from the tarot.
Right.
But it's like somebody took the symbolism, you got the king, the queen, the jack. Mm-hmm. And then you have the ace.
Yeah.
Which is like not really a face card, but sort of.
Right.
But it's also not really one, but sort of.
Yeah.
But it could be higher.
One, or it could be 11 or whatever. Yeah.
Right. And so there's 4 different suits, and each suit has what? 13.
That's right.
So you have the 12 disciples, and then the one, the ace of that.
Right.
Of those 12. Right.
Okay. Yeah, I got you. I'm following.
So there's so I was thinking of the king, the queen, and the jack are the Father, Son, or the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, the Father, the Holy Spirit, and the Son. So the king is Osiris,
Yeah.
queen is Isis, and the jack is Horus.
Right. Yeah.
And ace, I don't know what that is, but
Well, and so 13 is half of 26. Is that what you're saying?
yeah.
Yeah. And there,
So
there are 13 months in the lunar year. Because the lunar year is comprised of 13 months of exactly 30 days or whatever, something like
That's
that.
right. That's right.
Or it's exactly 28 days or what? It's something like that. Yeah.
29, I think. I don't know.
Yeah. You divide the lunar year is divided up into 13 months of precisely the same number of days. Yeah. And people are always like, oh, why are there 13 months? Well, because 13, and it's like lucky 13. The ancients thought 13 was a lucky number. We think we treat it as an unlucky number. Now, they won't even put 13th floors on buildings. And that's, if you look at what the ancients thought about 13, that's terrible. Like, that's where I want to work, is on the 13th floor. That's where all the badass shit happens, and the portals open and stuff.
Yeah. But this is weird. Like the deck of cards thing has been, I've just been kind of like plugging in this symbolism and just thinking like, we have all these games that we play with them. And then, of course, with the tarot deck, there's divination and all of this other stuff associated with it.
Think of how addicted people get to gambling with those cards.
And the chance and all the, all that
there's
stuff.
weird stuff with chance, which makes me start thinking about the game, which we'll have to go into a show about.
So there's
the dice.
This all thinking about all this, and I know I'm going way off here with cards, but this made me think of this one card trick that I was taught that I still remember. And I do not understand how it works. But it's like some mathematician must have figured this out or something. But I'll try to describe it the best I can. You can start with a deck of cards basically face up in your hand, and you lay down the first card. Whatever number that is, you continue, like you just count, ignore what the cards are behind it, but you count all the way up to 13. So if you lay down a 2, you go 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And if you lay down a jack, that's 11, right? Mm-hmm. There's 10 and then 11. So the jack, then you would be like 12, 13. And you do this with the whole deck of cards until you run out, or if you have some left over but you can't do it, you just keep them in your hand. And the way the trick works is you flip all these piles over that you've made, and then you have somebody select 3 of the piles.
You flip them over where they're face down?
You flip them over where they're face down.
Okay.
So that the first card you put down of each pile is now on top, but face down. You have somebody select 3 of the piles. You take all of the other piles and put them in your hand with whatever remaining cards you might have. You flip over the top card of 2 of the piles and leave the top card on the third pile still face down.
Okay.
And you're going to, by these, whatever those 2 numbers are, you're going to predict. And it's not a prediction. It's totally accurate mathematically, the top card of that third pile. So if, let's say you have a 2 on one and you have, a jack on the other one.
Okay.
You count 2 cards, and then you count the jack, which is 11 cards, and then you count an additional 10 cards.
Okay.
Then you count the remainder of cards you have in your hand.
And that's the number on
That's
top
the
of
number on the
Holy
top card.
crap, that's amazing.
And it's like, I've shown people this trick, and I always started out with like, I know this card trick. It's really weird, and I don't know how it works.
So it's still a trick to me, and I know how to do it.
An additional 10 cards. It's like, man, it's crazy. So if you laid down an ace, just to be so that it's clear, ace is 1.
Right.
If you laid down an ace when you were making the piles, that would be 1, and then you would go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way up to 13.
For some reason, the idea that tarot and these cards came from Egypt reminds me that alchemy also came from Egypt, and that's what the word means. Like Kemet is the old name. That's what they called themselves. Kemet was it. So alchemy meant way of Egypt. Okay, so it was 2 words. Alchemy. So alchemy is the way of Egypt. Like that's why it was powerful.
And Egypt was basically the center of knowledge of all.
Like think about the fact that Newton, basically one of the, when they say standing on the shoulders of giants, he's one of the giants that we're talking about in terms of science.
Right.
Newton gave us physics. Okay, he fucking invented it. All right. Now we don't, Newtonian physics. What they call Newtonian physics is now.
It's all bullshit.
But it works. Like it's like, okay, so Einsteinian physics, which is the next step.
It's all bullshit too.
Einstein defined a way of using physics in terms of space and time being one thing, and like the curvature of space, and like so the E equals mc squared, all this stuff that basically gives us relativity. Okay, that in some circumstances, when you're dealing with gravity or whatever, defines things more precisely than Newtonian physics do. But Newtonian physics works great for almost all of the applications that are in the macro, right? Like if I'm just doing simple calculations of like two bodies, and I want to know what their gravitational attraction is to each other or whatever in space, like Newtonian physics works great, and it defines the orbit really close. I mean, like extremely closely, but not as closely as Einsteinian ones do. But Einsteinian physics is much harder to calculate all this stuff out. Newton also invented calculus just so that he could finish the physics stuff, right? So he had to invent the math of calculus in order to do the physics crap. So Newton is one of the huge pillars of modern science, and Newton spent most of his time doing alchemy. That's what he was really interested in. He considered himself to be an alchemist.
Yeah.
Okay. So you think about that, like modern scientists are like, well, we're not going to talk about that because they think alchemy is like hogwash bullshit or whatever.
Right.
But Newton, who's like the pillar of like everything that they're doing, like thought it was serious, and he was serious about it. Like I love the story of the second half of his life where he became the master of the mint. That is just fascinating to me, that whole thing, because basically Newton, as an alchemist, believed in the Philosopher's Stone.
Right.
And the Philosopher's Stone is a euphemism for the creative essence. So what alchemists were always trying to do was to distill things out of other things, right? So you can have like a tiny bit of something, like you got water, and in that water is like salt and some other chemicals and some rare metals and all that stuff, right? And you could extract those from the water by doing certain distillation processes.
Right. And so they discovered liquor.
But alchemists were always trying to get the Philosopher's Stone, which was the idea was that the creator, whatever he is, generated the universe using this creative force, and that all things had some tiny minute essence of this creative force, like a residue left in it. As
God is in all of us.
Right. So the Philosopher's Stone was the distilled the distilled like purity of this essence of this creative force. This is why it could turn anything into anything else and give you everlasting life, because the creative force created life and created all the stuff. So you could take this, if you were able to distill enough of this creative force out of any material or whatever to where you had an appreciative amount of it, you could use it to like give yourself eternal life, because you could just keep rejuvenating yourself, or you could take lead and turn it into gold, because it's the creative force, right? This is the Philosopher's Stone. Newton believed in this because this is the point of alchemy, okay? So but he was like, he couldn't, the knowledge had been lost. He knew that the knowledge, or whatever, he believed that the knowledge to actually do this process to extract this creative force had existed, but it had been lost. But he had found enough stuff from Egypt where he saw evidence that it did exist, but he didn't have the process itself. And he was like, why should I recreate it when I know that alchemists who did have it created gold with it? And gold doesn't ever decay. So out there in the world somewhere are deposits, and he specifically thought of Solomon, because the idea was that Solomon had alchemy because of the wisdom of God that he got, right? So and then Solomon was incredibly wealthy, supposedly, because he created all this.
If the creative force and God are one and the same, then it's like
what?
I was just making this point that Solomon was given the wisdom of God. That would be the same thing as discovering
the Philosopher's Stone.
Yeah,
exactly. Okay, yeah. So Newton figured that Solomon's gold was out there somewhere, because he knew he made tons of it, and then it was ransacked. It was stolen from the temple or whatever. But it was out there somewhere. But Newton was like, I'm too. Like at this point, he was like in his 50s, and he was like, well, I can't go gallivanting all over the planet looking for Solomon's gold in like ancient places and fighting off tribesmen and whatever. I can't do that. But what I can do is make the gold come to me. So he becomes the master of the mint. At the time, the coinage of Europe, of England and Europe, it was terrible. Like people were always shaving bits off the edges or whatever. So he becomes the master of the English mint, and with the specific purpose of making the best coin in the world. In other words, to make golden coins or whatever that are just badass. And he is the one that invented the serrated edges.
Yeah, so
that people
you
can't
can't
shave
shave
shit
it
off
off.
there. A whole bunch of other stuff that he created, like
The ridge around the top and bottom.
yeah, all this stuff that he basically came up with to make an English coin became the most respected and trusted coinage in the world. So people with gold started to bring their gold to England. So it started to flow towards him, and every bit of gold that came into the mint that people were like, here, please coin this gold, like, stamp it into those English coins that are badass, that are always worth 20 freaking pounds or whatever they were. He like did chemistry on every single bit of gold. Like he was he called it the assay. Like, he's like studying it or whatever. How pure is it, whatever. But what he was really looking for was whatever difference there would be in Solomon's gold, because he figured that Solomon, in using directly the creative essence, the philosopher's stone, to make this gold, there would be more of the residue in that gold, and he would be able to find it by weighing it or whatever he did. All these processes that he had to like check the gold. And so that's why he became the master of the mint. I just think that's fucking badass. Like people were like, oh yeah, he became he became the head of the mint. And I'm like, yeah, because he was looking for the philosopher's stone, because he was an alchemist, and he was like, how genius is that to make the gold flow to you?
Yeah. And why did he do all of that?
Pyramids. That's right. And I bet you, I don't think he ever found it, but I bet you that's because the Spanish galleons leaving South America sank. Because think of all that fucking gold that was here. They talked about in Cuzco, the temple there had a freaking
Field of
corn, a field of corn made out of gold. Like, and the people didn't really consider gold to be, they didn't use it as money. To them, it belonged to the gods. And like that, that goes all the way back to Sitchin. Like,
Yeah.
You have these ancient buildings that they didn't build, but they're still putting gold in them because everybody went to work in the gold mines, but they weren't mining that gold because it was useful, and they weren't mining it because it was money. They just made pretty things out of it and put it in the temple. And they said that was because the gods would come get it eventually. They said they would return, right?
Yeah.
That's what?
That's crazy.
What are the some of those some of the structures in Peru that were said to have been plated entirely on the inside with gold, and the plates were held in the stone with little tiny gold nails. Like, just
That's nuts.
yeah, Faraday cages. Like, what were they doing with those things? There's one set that I remember. I can't remember where this is. I know it's in South America, but there's a set. There's 6 of these. I think maybe there's 5. There's 5 of these buildings. There's one big one in the middle, and they basically just look like cubes, but they're huge. You can walk into them. They have a door or whatever. And they're kind of in this arc, and they were said to be plated completely on the outside with gold, and on the inside with electrum, which was an alloy of gold and silver.
Yeah.
And held to the stone with little tiny nails made out of the same material or whatever. And it's like, when you look at them, you're like, what?
What's the other material that is
Orichalcum?
Yeah, orichalcum.
Now, nobody knows what that is. I think it might be a mixture of gold and copper, but it's not really clear.
That makes me
That
think
one said it was said to shine like red fire. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
The whole thing about alchemy, though, and how scriptards are just like, it's bullshit, transmutation. You can't friggin' make gold out of other metals.
Yeah.
Well, I watched this video, and I don't remember.
Oh, that's right.
What it was, but it's like this institution, this college has a.
Was it a Japanese guy?
Has a nuclear power plant.
Yeah.
In it, right? Kind of like the one in Austin.
Yeah.
But anyway, oh shit. So they do this experiment where they put this. I can't remember if it was mercury or lead. It was something like that. Like they put this metal down into the reactor thing or whatever in this place where they focus all this energy on and use this a ridiculous amount of freaking electricity.
Right.
And it took like, I don't remember.
Oh, that's right. They were hitting it for a long time, and they changed the lead into gold or whatever.
Yeah, they turned it into freaking gold, and it was like a tiny little bit. And they're like, okay, so this today's dollar amount for gold is worth like, they made however much, and it's like it's $1,100, but it costs us like $3,000 or $4,000 to use the power plant for that long. So it's like, yeah, it can be done, but it's not economically feasible. It's like,
Not that way.
but still, the point is that it can be done.
Yeah.
Using what? Resonance.
Right.
The right
they were
frequency.
using the energies. They were using
the right frequency and the potential. So this is something that I've been thinking about too, like in listening to these books with, the stuff about the pyramid and this and the way, the pharaohs thought of the creative force or power.
Yeah.
And like I don't want to get into this, but the Jed pillar and all this weird stuff that was like, the sun discs, and it's like they had this way of thinking about creation or the creative force or the power of the universe. And I started thinking, like, I wonder if that is sort of like parabolized in this term of God with
the creative force.
Yeah. These, it's whatever this power is, this original source. And what if we were to think in modern terms, like, what is the original source of all energy?
0 point.
And and so I don't know.
No, that's that. Well, I'm connecting because I'm thinking you're talking about that, and I'm thinking of 0 point energy. Like, that what looks to us like empty space, like in physics, this is like mainstream physics says this. This is not like a fringe theory, but mainstream physics basically says that empty space, what looks to us like totally empty space, is actually an unbelievable amount of energy that's all balanced perfectly.
Right. So there's no potential.
It equals 0.
Right.
But they were saying that the amount of energy in every little tiny plank of space is equal to all the energy that all the stars in the universe put out over their entire life.
So it's like the situation with electricity where you have to create this imbalance.
Right.
So you take a battery, you put some chemicals together that create this imbalance with what? The ground. Mm-hmm. And so then when you connect the circuit together, right, it's trying to equalize itself and return to a balance, return to
and
equilibrium.
It's forcing its way through the metallic crystalline structure.
Right.
Heating up the wires and shit.
Right. So that's the way I look at all energy, all force or whatever is actually the imbalance of force, the imbalance.
Wow, that makes me think of
That's how we can transfer it. It's always wanting to transfer, like they have this phrase in physics that is, everything is seeking the lowest energy state.
Right.
So that
what that really means is a balanced out. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. The lowest energy state, 0.
Right.
But there's polarity in everything.
The lowest kinetic energy state or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's really a principle that is throughout. Like, it's the lowest energy state is quote unquote what everything is seeking, as if everything had like a will to seek it.
Yeah.
But it's
I
like
want to be sitting in the least hardest place to sit.
Right. And then the path of least resistance. So you got water flowing down a mountain. It doesn't flow over the hill. It flows down in the valley. It flows in the lowest point. But it's always going downhill, seeking equilibrium.
So think about
through the path of least resistance.
Think about all the quote unquote indigenous peoples that talk about living in harmony.
Right.
And how we're not.
And when you look at energy in terms of resonance and harmonies of resonance, it's like it's easy to understand that that's sort of a quant-suffed, like,
but I mean,
heritage, basically.
I mean, I know that the American Indians, at least the Hopi or whatever, and several others, they specifically say that the reason for the past cataclysms was because humanity stopped living in harmony. So does that mean that, like, are they basically saying that God's desire humans to live in the lowest energy state? Is that basically what we could translate that to?
I don't know, because harmony.
That's what they're doing.
Harmony to me is.
But it also could be everything
harmony
equals 0.
Harmony is a non-destructive state.
Yeah. Right.
So it
harmonizes. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you have two resonances that are detuned or out of tune, they try to
fight with each other.
Attenuate each other, or they.
Yeah. I'm just saying that, like, I started to think of that, like, where everything balances, to be in balance equals 0. I guess you can't really say that's harmony.
But throughout the path, right, the path to 0,
yeah,
which is the equilibrium,
yeah,
there is harmony in the flow of the, towards everything's heading towards equilibrium.
Right. I guess what I'm saying is like, why do they always seem to seek like low energy societies? They want to live without power sources, without the stuff that's what I mean. Like, they're basically implying that all of our stuff, the things we think of as being progress, technology, our toys, our tools, are disharmonious.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't say that they're wrong or right about that, but I that kind of sounded like I said wrongo writing. Anyway, wrongo.
That's why they wrote it wrongo. All right, that's the end of the show for this week. We ended it on the wrongo note.
Yeah, try to live in harmony, folks. Seek the path of least resistance. Thanks for listening.
And don't forget, you can send questions or comments to brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com, or you can comment on the blog on any one of the shows at brothersoftheserpent.blogspot.com. Thank you very much. Oh, and thanks to Laura for the intro. That was amazing. And thanks to Smith Sonic Studios for loaning us a mic like 5 years ago.
That we couldn't use.
But it was awesome. Thank you.
Plus more.
Snakes do that. Yep. Pathway resistance.
And be brothers with those snakes.
That's right.
Snakes. Snake bros.